Hey YouTube, how's it going? Dustin Smith here with A2K, Allegiance to the King, and today we're going to be talking about resurrection of the dead, and specifically the righteous and the unrighteous being raised from the dead, looking at the location from which they are being raised, and how that equates into the question of what happens when people die, where do they go when they die, and what's going to happen when they're raised from the dead. Of course, this is a well misunderstood concept within modern Christianity because modern Christianity, for the most part, believes that when someone dies, their soul or their spirit either goes off to heaven or goes off to hell, and the concept of resurrection is not really something that is important to them. But for the writers of the New Testament, the concept of resurrection was extremely important. It was so powerfully important because since Jesus was raised from the dead, that demonstrates that God is able to raise other people from the dead, and the promise is that other people are going to be raised from the dead on the last day because of the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus was raised first as the first fruits, and then others are going to be raised after him. Let's look at this concept in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2, one of the earliest places to where this concept of bodily resurrection from the dead, from the grave, gets depicted in the scriptures. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2 has so many powerful things in it. Check out the words of this passage. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. Okay, that's Daniel 12:2, and it tells us so much information in this one little passage. It says that the people are doing something. What are they doing? They're sleeping. Okay, that doesn't mean that they're taking a nap, around noontime. What that means is that they are dead. Sleeping is a euphemism for death over 60 times within the scriptures, and this is one of the places where we see that euphemism. Okay, they are sleeping. Where are they doing it? They're doing it in the dust of the ground. Okay, that is where people are when they're dead. They're in the dust of the ground. They're in the grave. They're in what the Old Testament would call Sheol and what the New Testament would call Hades. Those are a variety of words used to describe death, the grave. Okay, so they're sleeping. Where are they doing it? In the dust of the ground. What's going to happen to them? They are going to awaken. They are going to be raised from their sleep. They're going to wake up from their sleep in resurrection. Okay, but there's two different groups here. Okay, these to everlasting life. Notice here, everlasting life. This is the first occurrence of the phrase everlasting life in the scriptures. Everlasting life here means resurrection life, eternal life as a resurrected, bodily resurrected individual, but others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. All right? So we have the people who are sleeping, specifically, they're in the dust of the earth. Okay? They're not sleeping in heaven. They're not sleeping in hell. They're not sleeping in some sort of Catholic purgatory. No, they're in the dust of the earth. They're in the grave. They're in Sheol. They're in Hades. They're in the dust of the earth. And they're going to awaken in resurrection on this day, when some of them are going to awaken to everlasting life, to eternal life, to resurrection life that is bodily resurrection in a new body that can never die again. But the others are going to be raised to everlasting contempt. Okay? Now, if you remember those particular points of Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2, we're going to see in John chapter 5, verses 28 through 29, that Jesus believed this passage and he taught from being influenced by this passage. Look here in John 5, verses 28 through 29, and just listen to the words that Jesus says here, and it's going to sound very clearly in a moment that he was influenced by Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2. Jesus says in 5:28 of John's Gospel, "Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming in which all who are in their tombs will hear his voice and will come forth, those who did good deeds to a resurrection of life, those who committed the evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment." That's John 5, verses 28 through 29. Notice here, he says there's a time coming when everybody, okay, not just their bodies, okay, but all persons, everybody, okay, who are in their tombs, okay. Notice they're not off in heaven. They're not down in hell somewhere, okay, and they're definitely not in some sort of purgatory. They are in their tombs. They're in their graves. They're in their monuments to their death, okay. They're going to hear his voice and they're going to come forth, okay. And you've got two different groups of people, just like we saw in Daniel 12:2. We've got those who did good deeds, to a resurrection of life, okay? That is a resurrection of eternal life, the life of the age to come, we might say. And then you've got those who committed evil deeds, to a resurrection of judgment, all right? So notice in both those passages, in Daniel 12:2 and in John 5:28 through 29, that the people who are dead are in the dust of the ground, or they're described here in 5:28 of John, that they are in their tombs, they're in their graves, okay? That's where dead people are, and that's where they're going to be until they get raised from the dead, and either they get raised to eternal life, or they get raised to judgment and everlasting contempt, okay? Hopefully this has encouraged you in your understanding of what happens when people die, where they are when they die, and what's going to happen when they are raised from the dead on the day of judgment, okay? Be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more videos from A2K. My name is Dustin Smith. I'm with Allegiance to the King, and until next time, take care.